Et voilà. Okay. And Andrea, did you get that little notification saying that the recording started? Perfect.
Yes.
Okay. Parfait. Alors, bienvenue à la cérémonie du prix du savoir en libre accès. Welcome to the Open Scholarship Award Ceremony. Je suis Leanne Butler, la bibliothécaire de la communication savante et co-présidente du prix du savoir en libre accès de 2023. I will be your MC for this event. Nous allons débuter avec quelques brefs discours, suivis de la présentation de notre invité d'honneur. If you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to add them in the chat. Vous pourrez utiliser vos micros pour poser vos questions après la présentation. Sans plus tarder, j'aimerais céder la parole à Talia Chan, la bibliothécaire en chef et doyenne des bibliothèques à l'Université d'Ottawa. Talia?
Merci beaucoup, Liane. Il me donne un grand plaisir de vous voir ici dans cette salle virtuelle en si grand nombre. Euh, donc, c'est un grand plaisir pour moi et un privilège de vous accueillir à cette 8e cérémonie de remise du prix du savoir en libre accès de la bibliothèque et de réciter l'affirmation autochtone de l'Université d'Ottawa. Nous rendons hommage au peuple algonquin, gardien traditionnel de cette terre. Nous reconnaissons le lien sacré de longue date l'unissant à ce territoire qui demeure non cédé. Et nous rendons également hommage à toutes les personnes autochtones qui habitent Ottawa, qu'elles soient de la région ou d'ailleurs au Canada. Nous reconnaissons les gardiennes et gardiens des savoirs traditionnels de tous âges. Nous honorons aussi leurs dirigeantes et dirigeants d'hier, d'aujourd'hui et de demain au courage indéniable. The University of Ottawa's Indigenous affirmation is a special acknowledgement of the Algonquin Nation on whose traditional territory the University of Ottawa is located. And it's meant to promote a spirit of awareness of the relationships between peoples, and in this instance, in particular, the relationship between the University of Ottawa community and the First Peoples. Avant de céder la parole, parce que je sais que nous avons plusieurs des beaux informations à partager, incluant une présentation de Dr. Lynn Boker, j'aimerais juste féliciter Dr. Boker pour cette reconnaissance. Et aussi, j'aimerais remercier toutes les personnes qui ont travaillé à la remise du prix d'aujourd'hui. The co-chairs of the committee, les coprésidents du comité, sont Andrea Lobel, bibliothécaire au service des droits d'auteur, et aussi Leanne Butler, bibliothécaire responsable de la communication savante. And of course, where would we be without a hardy and healthy selection committee? On the committee, we have Caroline Hislop, Associate University Librarian for Research Services, Chantal Ripp, bibliothécaire de recherche donnée, et le professeur Mathieu Boisgontier, professeur agrégé à la Faculté des sciences de la santé et chercheur principal à l'Institut de recherche Bruyère. Enfin, j'aimerais remercier tous les chercheurs et chercheuses, enseignantes et enseignants qui appuient le libre accès dans leur pratique quotidienne. Merci d'avoir soumis vos projets dans le cadre de ce prix et merci de faire avancer la science ouverte. Cette cérémonie ne pourrait avoir lieu sans votre contribution. Thank you very much all. And I think I'm passing it over now to Caroline.
Merci, Talia. So yes, I'll pass it over now to Caroline Hislop, Associate University Librarian for Research Services.
Bonjour, bon après-midi et merci Talia et Liane. Je suis vraiment heureuse d'être ici avec vous cet après-midi à l'occasion de cette cérémonie de remise du prix de savoir en libre accès de 2024. Leanne suggested I speak just for a few minutes about the U Ottawa Library's commitment to open scholarship. And so I thought I would take a moment to go back to an early annual report. When I say early, about 20 years ago. So I'm looking at the annual report of the U Ottawa Library of 2003, 2004, and I see that there's a section in there called Our Commitment to Open Access. It noted at that time that that was the year that we joined SPARC, the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition. And it also noted our support of Biomed Central, an open access archive of biomedical literature. And that was it. That was the whole, that was our entire commitment at that time, or at least that was what was listed in the annual report 20 years ago. Of course, it would not be accurate to suggest that our commitment to open scholarship started 20 years ago. Because, of course, a commitment to the free exchange of knowledge, the democratization of scholarship has always been a part of what libraries are all about. But I do think it's safe to say that our open scholarship program has come a long way in the last 20 years. We now support about a dozen open access journals on our instance of OJS, that's Open Journal Systems, and that number continues to grow. For the creation and the dissemination of open educational resources, we provide guidance, financial support, and infrastructure to help creators, some of whom are librarians and library personnel, to create open textbooks and other open educational resources. Through our partnership with CRKN, that's the Canadian Research Knowledge Network, we participate in numerous read and publish agreements that help enable U Ottawa authors to publish in open access journals. And of course, through UO Research, the University of Ottawa's institutional repository, we provide free online access to theses and scholarly articles and other elements of scholarly output. Of course, those are just a few examples of the way that the U Ottawa Library supports open access. And of course, there's more that we do through advocacy, through participation in consortia and associations, continually seeking to understand, to adapt, to provide leadership in the ever-shifting open scholarship landscape. Aujourd'hui, nous sommes ici pour célébrer le prix du savoir en libre accès, un prix qui reconnaît les champions du corps professoral et les personnels enseignants qui font preuve d'excellence en matière de savoir en libre accès. J'espère que vous serez d'accord que c'est toujours un plaisir de célébrer. Je pense que le fait d'avoir un prix comme celui-ci est une excellente façon de reconnaître que l'érudition ouverte fait partie de nos valeurs et de ce qui nous amène à consacrer notre vie professionnelle à l'enseignement, à la recherche. Et donc, un grand merci à tous les professeurs, les bibliothécaires, les professionnels, les archivistes, les administrateurs pour le rôle que vous jouez dans l'érudition ouverte. Bien sûr, nous sommes ici aujourd'hui pour témoigner notre gratitude et notre respect à Lynn Bowker pour ses contributions remarquables et son engagement en faveur du savoir en libre accès. Et maintenant, pour parler un peu plus du prix et de son récipiendaire, je voudrais passer la parole à Leanne Butler, notre bibliothécaire de communication savante. Merci, Leanne.
Thank you, Caroline. Merci beaucoup. I'm going to just say a little bit behind the award. In my role as scholarly communication librarian, I'm honored to participate alongside Andrea in delivering this award. So I'm really happy to be here today to celebrate Lynn. Le prix a été créé en 2016 et reconnaît les champions du corps professeur et du personnel enseignant qui font preuve d'excellence, comme Caroline a partagé aussi, en matière de savoir en libre accès, aussi bien par leur soutien que leur propre exemple. Le savoir en libre accès comprend tout ce qui a trait aux publications en libre accès, aux données ouvertes et aux ressources éducatives libres dans les domaines de l'enseignement et de la recherche. Candidates were assessed based on the primary criteria of openness in research and openness in teaching, followed by the secondary criteria of open advocacy and quality of the submission package. Je vais maintenant passer la parole à Andrea Lobel, la coprésidente du Prix du Savoir en libre accès, pour présenter notre invité d'honneur. Andrea?
Merci beaucoup, Leanne. Et bonjour tout le monde. Bienvenue. This afternoon, I'm delighted to introduce our 2023 Open Scholarship Award recipient, Dr. Lynn Bowker. Dr. Bowker est professeur titulaire de traduction et d'interprétation et se spécialise dans l'apprentissage de la traduction automatique. Elle a contribué et continue de contribuer à l'avancement de la recherche ouverte, tant dans son enseignement que dans sa recherche, et se concentre sur l'accessibilité de son travail à des publics non académiques, ainsi qu'à son lectorat dans les langues autres que l'anglais. Dr. Bowker a publié de nombreux ouvrages en libre accès et des ressources éducatives libres, dont Translating for Canada A, Using Game-Based Learning Online en 2020 et Demystifying Translation en 2023. Qui a déjà été téléchargé plus de 70 000 fois à travers le monde. Dr. Bowker's diverse approach to practicing and promoting open research also includes sitting on the advisory board for the Canadian Humanities and Social Sciences Commons, as well as serving as a collaborator on the European Union-funded project Developing Institutional Open Access Publishing Models to Advance Scholarly Communication, or DIAMAS. Her ongoing work also involves participating in webinars and other events, including but not limited to the Open Library Creator Spotlight in 2020, Fabrique REL in 2022, and eCampus Ontario in 2023. In brief, Dr. Bowker's dedication to open scholarship has been exemplary, and we're delighted to honor her this year. And now, without further ado, please join me in congratulating Dr. Lynn Bowker for her many achievements in the area of open scholarship.
May I take the floor?
Well, I kindly agreed to share some, Professor Bowker has kindly agreed to share some of her work and experiences in open scholarship with us this afternoon. And this will be followed by a question and discussion period. And so now I'll hand the virtual microphone over to you, Lynn.
Hey, thank you so much. Thank you for that very kind and generous introduction. And thank you for all of the initiatives that the University of Ottawa Library has put in place around open scholarship. One of the things that when I look back on my kind of development in the open scholarship world, one of the things that I note is that early on, there was a lot of confusion around open scholarship and a lot of, I think, misunderstanding, often confusing it with predatory publishing and sort of practices that were not, not good practices. And so I think that this type of work and support that's offered by the library, including this award, which, kind of gives a little bit of recognition to people who are working in that area, just raises the visibility about the benefits and the good things associated with open scholarship and helps to kind of correct some of those misperceptions that might still be out there, hopefully less, but, kind of helping to counter those misperceptions about open scholarship and its, potentially misunderstood aspects. So thank you so much for this. I'll share my screen now and try to, let me see, get the slideshow going. All right. Hopefully you can see that. And whoop, I'm going too far. It's only been, 4 years that we've been doing this, and I still don't have it down. There we go. Okay, so as I've already been introduced, I'm a professor at the School of Translation and Interpretation, and I'm here to share a little bit with you about some of my activities in open scholarship. J'aimerais faire une présentation bilingue, mais je trouve que c'est un peu difficile d'aller-retour entre les deux langues, alors je vais faire la première partie en français, suivie par la deuxième partie en anglais, mais certainement au moment où nous avons une possibilité d'avoir la conversation à la fin, soyez-vous à l'aise de faire votre intervention dans la langue officielle de votre choix. OK. Alors, pour structurer un peu ma conférence aujourd'hui, je vais essayer de partager un peu mon parcours ouvert qui comprend 4 volets principaux. Alors, je vais commencer par une petite introduction de mes activités en ce qui concerne les publications en libre accès. Un tout petit peu au sujet des données ouvertes. C'est une nouvelle direction pour moi. Alors, je commence à être plus active dans cette veine. La plupart de ma présentation va porter sur les ressources éducatives libres, une volet où j'ai beaucoup d'actions en ce moment. Je participe dans plusieurs activités. Et à la fin, je vais parler un peu d'une nouvelle direction qui est prendre le sujet de libre accès comme un sujet de recherche. Alors, mes recherches portent sur le sujet de libre accès, un nouvel projet euh, que je, euh, que je lance avec quelques collègues. Alors, ça, c'est plus ou moins les 4 volets de cette présentation aujourd'hui. Alors, je sais que pour la plupart d'entre vous, vous êtes déjà très, très familier, vous connaissez pas mal au sujet de libre accès, alors vous n'allez pas apprendre grand-chose, mais je pense que ça peut être intéressant quand même de comprendre mieux la perspective des professeurs ou des gens qui ne sont pas les experts en libre accès et les choses comme ça. Alors ça c'est pourquoi je vais faire une présentation de quelques sujets que vous connaissez sans doute, mais c'est vraiment pour vous donner la possibilité de comprendre la perspective d'un professeur en traduction, par exemple. Alors, pour moi, mon introduction initiale à le concept de libre accès, c'était vraiment par la plateforme Érudit, que vous connaissez sans doute. C'est une plateforme qui offre un accès en 95% des publications qui sont disponibles sur la plateforme Érudit sont disponibles en libre accès. Et c'est une plateforme canadienne et pour un chercheur en traduction, je suis vraiment chanceuse parce qu'il y a plusieurs revues spécialisées en traduction et interprétation qui se trouvent sur la plateforme Érudit. Alors, c'était vraiment par cet moyen que j'ai fait ma découverte initiale du concept de libre accès. Il y a, par exemple, plusieurs revues en traduction qui sont disponibles par la voie diamantée. Alors, ça veut dire que c'est une publication, une revue qui est gratuite pour les auteurs et les lecteurs. Alors, c'est plus ou moins la situation idéale. C'est une publication qui est financée par un tiers. Alors, pas par le lecteur et pas par l'auteur. Et il y a plusieurs érudits en traduction qui sont des revues diamantées. Et il y a aussi un autre modèle qui est disponible. C'est une revue qui est peut-être c'est pas le numéro le plus récent qui est disponible. Il y a une petite période d'embargo. Parfois, il faut attendre quelques mois pour avoir accès à tous les numéros. Et normalement, ce n'est pas le numéro le plus récent qui est disponible immédiatement, mais tous les archives sont disponibles. Alors ça, c'est un autre format de publier en libre accès avec la plateforme Érudit. Et cette année, c'est le 25e anniversaire d'Érudit. Alors, si vous ne le connaissez pas, je vous encourage d'aller explorer. Il y a vraiment beaucoup, beaucoup de revues et surtout les revues canadiennes en anglais et en français qui sont disponibles en Érudit. Alors, pour beaucoup de profs, je pense que surtout en humanité et sciences sociales, c'est là où nous avons avant une rencontre avec le concept de publication en libre accès. après ça, il y a peut-être 5 ou 6 ans, j'ai commencé de participer dans l'auto-archivage. Parfois, c'est connu par le nom libre accès par la voie verte. Et ça, c'est en principe, c'est simple, mais en réalité, c'est parfois un peu complexe pour les profs parce que il faut vérifier les conditions de chaque revue qui sont différentes pour établir quelles sont les conditions qui sont permises pour l'auto-archivage. Alors, c'est quelque chose où les chercheurs ont besoin d'appui, à mon avis, parce que c'est simple comme principe, mais c'est parfois un peu compliqué pour mettre en pratique. Mais il faut que les profs et les chercheurs connaissent l'auto-archivage parce que de plus en plus, c'est quelque chose qui est demandé, exigé, encouragé par les agences de subvention. Il faut souvent préparer un plan de diffusion qui inclut un aspect de partage ouverte, surtout si les subventions, si les projets sont financés par une subvention avec les fonds publics. Alors, toutes les agences gouvernementales, par exemple, ça devient de plus en plus commun qu'ils vont exiger un genre de partage et si vous n'avez pas un grand budget, qui vous permet de participer dans la voie dorée, ça veut dire payer pour publier. Si vous n'avez pas un grand budget, c'est la voie verte ou l'auto-archivage qui est le plus accessible pour le chercheur. Alors, il faut vraiment comprendre comment ça marche. Et j'ai commencé par le dépôt institutionnel à l'Université d'Ottawa, RUOR, que vous connaissez tous sans doute. Et ici, c'est vraiment les bibliothécaires qui fournissent un service indispensable pour comprendre comment et avec quelles conditions on peut partager la recherche dans le dépôt institutionnel. Alors, je suis vraiment, vraiment reconnaissante à l'expertise que nous avons dans la bibliothèque pour appuyer les chercheurs à cet égard. Et RUR, c'est le dépôt institutionnel à Ottawa, qui est excellent, mais il y a quand même d'autres dépôts. Et Andrea a mentionné que je suis membre du conseil pour une nouvelle initiative qui s'appelle the Canadian HSS Commons. Et c'est un dépôt, encore une fois, pour les humanités et sciences sociales, mais pan-canadien. Alors, c'est une initiative, ouais, je vais parler dans une minute. Voilà, voici juste RUOR qui est sans doute connu par tout le monde qui participe aujourd'hui. Mais voici le lien pour le HSS Commons. Ce n'est pas pour remplacer les dépôts institutionnels, mais pour complémenter, donner d'autres options pour partager par auto-archivage les fruits de nos recherches. Et il y a aussi un site qui peut être utile pour partager avec les chercheurs pour essayer de déterminer les conditions permises par les revues spécialisées pour partager quelle version de votre publication avez-vous le droit de partager, après quelle période et tout ça. Il y a un outil qui s'appelle Sherpa Romeo qui aide avec le processus de prendre les décisions, si ou non, ou quand on peut partager les articles ou les chapitres dans les instituts, des dépôts institutionnels, etc. OK. J'ai mentionné que c'est nouveau pour moi l'idée de participer dans le mouvement libre accès du point de vue de données. ce que je comprends, le but, c'est vraiment d'augmenter la transparence ou améliorer la possibilité de reproduire certains types de recherches. Alors, c'est pour encourager la validité, la rigueur scientifique pour combattre peut-être la fraude dans la recherche. Et aussi pour partager. Si vous avez pris le temps de créer dans mon cas, un corpus linguistique, par exemple, ça prend beaucoup de temps, ça exige pas mal de ressources humaines et financières. Et à la fin, si je peux partager ce corpus pour que les autres puissent faire leur propre recherche sur le corpus, ça, c'est dans l'esprit vraiment du mouvement au libre accès. Alors, je commence maintenant à essayer de partager aussi les données sur lesquelles ma recherche porte. Et dans mon cas, c'est souvent un corpus linguistique et ça peut être un simple fiche Excel, par exemple, avec les textes de départ et les textes d'arrivée. Et juste comme nous avons les dépôts pour les publications, il y a aussi les dépôts ouverts pour les données. Moi, j'ai déjà utilisé deux. Il y a Zenodo et GitHub. Je suis certain qu'il y a d'autres, mais j'ai participé sur une équipe de recherche et ces deux ressources, ces deux dépôts ont été connus par d'autres membres de mon équipe. Alors, ils ont recommandé qu'on partage nos données sur ces sites, mais ça aussi peut être quelque chose où la bibliothèque peut augmenter la visibilité d'autres types de dépôts. Je ne sais pas s'il y en a un qui sont canadiens, par exemple. Les deux que je mentionne ne sont pas spécifiquement canadiens, mais oui, ça peut être intéressant à savoir pour respecter les exigences de confidentialité ou de ne pas déposer les données sur un serveur aux États-Unis ou quoi que ce soit. Il y a de plus en plus de régulations réglementaires à respecter et parfois c'est difficile pour les chercheurs à, euh, à rester à jour avec tout ça, mais heureusement, il y a un appui, encore une fois, fourni par la bibliothèque. Il y a des équipes de gestion des données, de recherche, et ça aussi, c'est quelque chose qui est de plus en plus exigé par les organismes de subvention. Il faut au moins avoir un plan. Il faut expliquer comment vous allez gérer vos données qui peut inclure une section sur les données ouvertes. Alors, encore une fois, je suis reconnaissante à la bibliothèque d'offrir un appui aux profs pour laquelle ce n'est pas nécessairement évident. C'est assez nouveau pour beaucoup d'entre nous. OK. I will flip into English now, if that's okay, to talk a little bit about open educational resources. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm doing a mad dash through my career, but I just wanted to give you at least a little bit of a sneak peek at some of the different ways that I've engaged with the concept of open. And actually, probably the area where I've had the most activity has been in open educational resources. Today, just to respect the time that's available to us and to leave time for discussion, I'm not going to talk about adoption or integration of existing resources, but of course I have done that. And that was really how I started engaging with open educational resources. But today I'm going to share a little bit more about the side of creation. And again, it was the library that was so instrumental to me. I applied for the very first, I think, iteration of the Open Educational Resource Grants program that was offered by the library. So this was kind of pre-pandemic or right at the beginning of the pandemic, I think, the first iteration of the grant. And I was so fortunate to get one. And Melanie Brunet was the librarian who really held my hand through the whole process. I was a little bit nervous about starting out, and she was fantastic and continues to be today, really supportive for all aspects of this program. And another place where I've had good luck and support and opportunities to kind of participate in open activities has been through the eCampus Ontario program. So that is a pan-Ontario program that has the Open Library, which is a repository for OER. They offer different types of training. They can just be one-off workshops or, a little webinar, but it could also go all the way up to sort of micro-credentials. The micro-credentials are not specifically on open learning or open education, but more about online teaching, which of course, when you're preparing material for online teaching, you do want to make sure that all of the contents that you're putting in your online module have either, an open license for them or the correct permissions and things like that. So even though the micro-credentials are not specifically about open, they cover a lot of concepts that are relevant to the open movement. And the eCampus Ontario happens to be the group that I have got my Pressbooks account through, and that's an OER creation platform. And so this is the platform that I've used to create a couple of my open educational resources. So I've accessed that also through the eCampus Ontario. So those two kind of groups, the Ottawa Library and the eCampus Ontario, have really provided a lot of support in different ways, whether through access to infrastructure or through access to knowledge that are so important. I think professors are experts in the content of their material, but they're not necessarily experts in how to get it out there in a way that makes it, kind of open and accessible to everyone. And so this type of support is vital. And as I'm going to explain, it's a little bit different than the conventional publishing process that we're used to. So for a lot of people who are just starting to explore open education resources, it's a learning curve. And to know that you have support and expertise that you can count on really takes away some of the anxiety that might otherwise be associated with stepping outside the normal process that you're used to for producing resources. Okay, so I've had two different types of OER creation experiences, and I'd like to kind of present them both to you in a sort of comparative way because they each have strengths and weaknesses, and this might be interesting to you to understand some of the benefits and also in the case of, maybe weaknesses where maybe the library could help or step in or augment. I don't want to put too much pressure on you because you already do a lot, but if you're all, everyone's usually looking for ways to improve. So there may be some opportunities here where you could, try to do a little bit more if you have the time and energy. So my two experiences, the first one has been to to create OERs using Pressbooks myself. Andrea mentioned in the introduction one of the ones that I produced, which is Translating for Canada. I produced that in 2021 and just recently, with the help of Melanie, put out a version 2 of that one. And then, I feel a little bit greedy, but I was fortunate enough to get a second OER creation grant. And so I will soon be releasing, I'm coming to the end of the development period now, and I'll soon be releasing another OER that I've developed with the support of Ottawa U. So both of those had a grant from the OER Creator Program, and were both hosted through Pressbooks, or Pressbooks is the platform that I used to share them. My other experience has been to develop an open textbook with a major publisher, in this case, Routledge, which belongs to the Taylor and Francis Group. And this was one that I did through the gold route, meaning I, as the author, paid quite a lot of money to have this made available in open access. And so I'll tell you a little bit about that experience too, and what I got out of it, and where the differences lie in these two experiences. So my experience with Pressbooks is that, it's really a self-driven process, right? It's like you decide that you want to do it, and then you do it. It's kind of nice. You don't have to answer to anybody. You've got a lot of freedom to do what you want. But you also have a more responsibility, I would say, because you're responsible not only for the content, which is normal. Professors are comfortable with that. They're quite responsible and used to creating content, but also with the sort of desktop publishing side of it. So you have to package your content as well, beyond just maybe a PowerPoint deck that you might be used to making. So I use the Pressbooks platform. It is a user-friendly platform, but it does have a few glitches. There were some tutorials that I took advantage of, webinars, some through the library, some through TLSS, which is the Teaching and Learning Support Service on campus, and some through eCampus Ontario. So if you're willing to kind of sign up and go, there are lots of opportunities available for you to learn about it, but you do have to, because you are responsible for packaging it as well as creating the content. I had a mixed experience with tech support from eCampus Ontario, in the sense that not that they weren't able to help, but that they don't have a sort of 24-hour help line. So they weren't always quick answering. And if there's, if you're really stuck, then you can't advance until they get back to you. And sometimes it was a bit slower, didn't work as well with my schedule. Excellent support from the library. Again, Melanie, I cannot thank her enough for all of the support that she's given me, way above and beyond what I think is reasonable to expect, but I'm very grateful for it. So, you have to be prepared, I think, to realize that when you're working in the open world, it's not like a slick off-the-shelf product with a high kind of tech support. And, you have to be a little bit self-driven and go looking for answers and experiment a lot. I found there was a lot of experimentation. If I could give one golden tip to anybody, the first Pressbook that I prepared, I kind of was writing the content in the Pressbooks platform, and I wouldn't recommend that. The second time I did it, now the new one that I'm developing, I've prepared the content in Word. It's an environment that I'm a lot more used to. It's much easier for me to move things around. It just was faster and smoother. So if I could just give a little tip to anyone who's thinking about preparing a Pressbook, consider preparing your content outside of the platform and then sort of like dumping it in at a later stage, at more of a close to being finishing stage. Pressbooks, I've created both of my resources. I have tried to do bilingual, so not a single bilingual resource, but an equivalent resource in English and French. Pressbooks does have a French language interface. As a translator, perhaps I'm more critical than other people might be, but I find the quality of the interface language very uneven. It hasn't been properly localized. There are chunks of it where you still get English even when you're in the French interface, or the choices, like I could only pick from fields that had things like traducteur, even though the person who translated for me and helped me develop the French was a woman, I didn't have the option to identify her as a traductrice, for example. So there are some limitations in the way that it's been localized, but it is available in French, which is, already a step in the right direction. Pressbooks is really strong for content organization and navigation features. So I really liked those aspects. I found that it helped me to create, without a lot of effort, a good organizational structure, table of contents. And from a user point of view, it's very easy then to navigate through my final product. That's a really strong feature of Pressbooks. It also has multimedia support. You can insert images, you can insert videos. Of course, it's up to you as you're creating an open resource to find, if you want to put pictures in your resource, if you want to insert videos, you need to make sure that they're open resources as well. So there could be, it can take longer than you think to find open images of things that you want them to be, the images of certain things, and to find them also in open source. So that was where some of the webinars that I took and the other training supports that I had were really helpful, because they pointed me to stock banks of images that are free to be used, and other things like that. So a little bit of time investment to find other open resources to integrate with your own open resource. Pressbooks also has other tools, a possibility. Something new that I've learned with my second Pressbook is how to integrate what's called H5P, which is a plugin that allows you to create interactive exercises. So this is really nice for teaching resources because often you want the students to try something themselves, not just read about it. And so I'm really happy to have learned it. And I was nervous. I thought maybe it's not going to go smoothly, but it did. It all went quite smoothly. So I'm pretty happy about that. Pressbooks can also, even though, you know, they're sort of standard format is to have an online kind of ebook. You can export it to other formats. You can export it to PDF, for example, print PDF, interactive PDF. So even though you've created it in Pressbooks, you can export it to another format. So those are just some of my observations about working with that tool. The challenges that come with it, again, it's up to you as the creator to come up with the right license. And this can also be a little bit intimidating the first time you do it. There are about half a dozen different options within the Creative Commons system, and it's important to understand what the different features of the license options are, what they will allow you to do, or rather what they will allow other people to do with your work. Again, though, the library really is great in providing this kind of support. And I think without it, that would have been kind of a dissuading factor for me to go into the open, just trying to decide which license would make sense. Something that I hadn't considered, and I think a lot of professors probably don't consider, is that it's not enough to make the open resource. Like, what do you do with it when you have it? And here again, the library was a huge resource. Melanie just kind of took charge of me. She said, well, of course, you need to put it in various repositories and it needs to be indexed. And I'm just like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. But it was really helpful to have Melanie walk me through that process, because what's the point of making something? I mean, I guess you could make it just for your own class, but if you want other people to use it, you need to make it discoverable. And it's not necessarily obvious how to do that on your own. Likewise, the marketing, you're responsible not only for the content creation and then for the desktop publishing and then for making it discoverable, but also the marketing. So this is another thing that you have to do on your own. There's no peer review process. I said that you had the freedom to basically do whatever you want, and there's no requirement on the part of most of these repositories that your work has gone through the formal peer review process that we normally associate with publishing. And I would say also, your work is less likely to be reviewed. So if you make an ebook, normally when you publish something, your publisher will try to help you get it reviewed by other people. So doing book reviews. And I think open resources are currently less likely to be reviewed. Certainly nobody has reviewed any of my open resources in a formal way. I mean, they might have done their own review, but they're not the kind of published reviews that we're used to. So that was my experience with Pressbooks. Now to talk very quickly about the other experience that I've had, which is with Routledge. This was the gold route, as I said, and I cannot overstate how expensive it was. It was freakishly expensive and beyond, I would say, the means of most people. Certainly, I'm not sure that I would be able to do it again. I mean, it just very much depends on you having a grant and a funding organization that's willing to allow you to allocate such a high portion of your grant to the publishing house. It does follow a much more conventional publishing process. So I wanted to make an e-textbook, an open textbook. I had to submit a proposal. The proposal was reviewed. The manuscript itself was peer reviewed in the very formal, typical fashion. But I was only responsible for the content. So I didn't have to do any of the desktop publishing, the typesetting or formatting. I won't say that it's not possible to have a multimodal textbook, but it wasn't an option that I was offered. Maybe I would have had to pay more. I don't know. But my textbook is basically a PDF. It doesn't have these interactive exercises. It doesn't have videos. It doesn't even have images in it. It's very much just a PDF version of my textbook. The publisher chose the license. I did not really get a say in it, and they chose the most restrictive license. So, for example, as someone who's, a translator, I would like to make this an option to have it translated into other languages, but it has an ND sort of restriction on it, which means it can't be translated unless another publishing house negotiates the translation rights. So that was disappointing to me to find out that that was a restriction that they insisted on. And I really didn't, I mean, I guess I could have just not gone through with the publication, but they didn't give me the flexibility to choose the kind of license that I wanted. What they did give me, though, was a ton of marketing support. And so I feel like the book that I published through Routledge has a lot more visibility, and I didn't have to do the work of putting it in different indexes. They just, even though it's a free open access, they still kind of sell it as part of their packages. So it's in libraries all over the place. It's it had a high visibility, and it has actually already been reviewed as a book review. So it's sort of much more following that conventional publishing process. So if I could summarize just in a sort of quick table for you some of the pros and cons. So with the Pressbooks, I was responsible for the content and the presentation or the packaging of it. With Routledge, I only had to worry about the content. With Pressbooks, it was not peer reviewed, which, in our world, we sometimes like that validation. Now, I could ask people to review it, but it would be my responsibility, I think, to organize that. And, just leaving it on its own organically, nobody has reviewed it yet that I know of. Whereas with Routledge, it's more that familiar process, and you go through all of those stages. You submit the proposal, then you get the peer review feedback, you make the revisions, and then it's published eventually. My Pressbook got multimedia aspects, interactive aspects to it. My Routledge textbook does not. My Pressbooks, I got to choose the license, so I was able to kind of make it more open, whereas with the Routledge publication, the most restrictive license was applied to it. With the Pressbooks, I have to do the marketing. With Routledge, they provided marketing support. And I think that kind of goes hand in hand with the discoverability of it. I think the discoverability of Pressbooks might be a little bit lower, whereas the discoverability with a big publisher like Routledge is quite high. And you can see just by the numbers, these are on related topics, I would say. I mean, they're not the same, obviously the same content, but they're both about translation. And over 2.5 years, 5,000 people accessed my English and my French versions of my Pressbook. And I was really happy with that number. I thought that was fantastic, and I still think it's fantastic. The other one, though, has been accessed by 70,000 people in 6 months. And I think that just shows the visibility that a large known entity publisher can bring to your work. But, at what cost? I don't want to put the actual dollar figure out there because it sounds a little gross, but it was gross, the amount that I had to pay for the Routledge publication. So just to kind of, show you some of the pros and some of the cons. What's next? As I said, for me now, I'm actually interested in looking at open access as a subject of research, but I'm particularly interested in looking at multilingualism as a facet of open. To make research open, we should make it available in more than one language. So I'm currently working on a SSHRC grant project, which is about looking at the use of language technologies, because I'm a translator, this machine translation technology, and looking at whether or not that is being used or can be used to support multilingual scholarly communication. So we're doing a systematic review, and we've just kind of deposited our final report just before Christmas. So I'll just give you a few highlights. What we've found is that most people are using machine translation. That's the most popular tool. There are other translation tools out there, but machine translation, like Google Translate, is the most popular tool. Of course, our kind of cutoff point for the systematic review was halfway through 2023, and these large language models like ChatGPT were just getting going then. So I think if we did this review even 2 or 3 years from now, we'd see a lot more interest in the large language models. What's also interesting, though, is to note the gaps. For the moment, the focus is on written scholarly communication, and little attention is being paid to how technologies could be leveraged at a conference, for example, to share, maybe through subtitles or something like that. There's less attention being paid there. What I found super disappointing is that we all know that English has dominated scholarly communication over the past 50 or so years, and these tools, in principle, have the potential to help make the ecosystem more multilingual. So we could be perhaps allowing everyone to publish in their own language and then using these tools to read each other's work. But what's actually happening is that non-Anglophones are using the tools to help them write in English more easily, more quickly. So it's good that it's relieving the cognitive burden of non-Anglophones, but it's not actually pushing us towards a more multilingual ecosystem at the moment. So I think there's some work to be done there. I do think there's an appetite for it, but I think we need guidelines and policies, especially that will shift the responsibility and the expectation that we should still be publishing in English. These tools can be used in other ways, and I think that we need to push for that. It also, for me, basically tells us that technologies can play an important role, but they're not enough on their own. We just leave the technologies out there without any policy support or other types of kind of guidelines, then we're not going to achieve a multilingual scholarly communication ecosystem in the short term. So there's policy work to be done, and we're sort of working on that next. And now I will stop talking because I would like to leave some time for a little bit of conversation. And I apologize, I probably should have stopped 5 minutes ago.
Thank you so much, Lynn. I'll just there's a couple claps there in the from the audience. So thank you so much. I think it's clear your work in open scholarship is really impressive, and it's obvious why you were this year's candidate for the award. So thank you so much. Je vous invite maintenant à poser des questions à Dr. Bowker, si tu veux poser dans le chat ou juste enlever votre micro. Alors, est-ce qu'il y a des questions? Non? J'ai une question que je peux poser. So you spoke a little bit about Érudit's 25th anniversary, and I think that it kind of it's a good time to reflect on really where we are at. And I think you've kind of walked us through all the different open practices that you incorporate in your work. And my question to you is really, how can the university best engage the next generation of researchers to implement open scholarship practices, mais plus précisément, comment l'institution ici peut mieux soutenir et encourager les pratiques ouvertes.
It's a great point, and I think it's a little bit like the point I closed on with the use of machine translation and scholarly communication, for example. Without the right supports around it, the technology won't solve the problems. So we need to, as you say, have kind of some institutional practices. And one of the biggest concerns for professors and researchers is that their open work will not be valued. It won't be valued by tenure committees. It won't be valued when it comes up to promotion time, for example. So I think any opportunities, like I know that it's valued by the library, and your award is a fantastic thing and for raising the visibility of that. But anytime that the library has the opportunity to be part of larger kind of committees that are setting some of these policies, to be able to bring your expertise to say, no, open doesn't mean non-rigorous. Open doesn't mean, you know, like cutting the corners. So I don't know how to get that message out effectively. I feel that it is a piece that where the library has a role to play, but it needs cooperation from other parts of the institution as well, such as the people who are making these policies about, you know, what do you need to get tenure? What do you need to get promotion? What do you need to get a grant? It's the research assessment piece that for me is still not satisfactory, because I feel that open is judged in a way that is not fair and that is not really reflective of the value that open brings. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. There was a comment Yu Young had placed in the chat. She says it was interesting to see the number of access between the two platforms we index in Omni, but asked myself how we as a library and librarians can increase its visibility.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have the answer for that either, other than to say thank you for indexing it there. I mean, it's hard. It's really hard to compete with those big 5 publishers who have just, you know, they just have such well, first of all, a lot of money, but also just they've really cornered the market. They have such high visibility that it must be hard even for smaller publishers to compete, never mind open publishers and libraries who are also trying to do that. Yeah, I don't have a nice answer. Like I said, I was actually thrilled with the 5,000 people accessing it over the 2-year period. I actually think that's fantastic. I am delighted with that result. And that was largely down, I would say, to Melanie helping me to understand more about the different places to index it. And that, yeah, you don't just put it up on your own little website and expect people to stumble across it. Like you have to get it out there and make it discoverable. And that's a piece that a lot of professors don't have. They don't even think about it, and they certainly don't know how to implement it. So the work that's being done there, maybe, yeah, I don't know. I guess if I had to say, maybe it's just the stage I'm at now. I need less help now developing or creating the resources, but I need more help with that marketing discoverability piece. Yeah. So if there's any kind of workshops or anything that you might think that you could offer in that regard.
Yeah. I think you're pointing to as well, you know, really integrating this thinking from creation to the end throughout the workflow of research is really, really important, an important piece to teach students as well. I'm conscious of time. It's already 2 o'clock. Alors, je vais conclure la cérémonie de remise du prix de savoir en libre accès et félicitations encore une fois à Dr. Bowker et merci pour votre présentation et votre engagement envers le libre accès. In particular, your focus on making your work accessible to all audiences and in multiple languages. So thank you, Dr. Bowker, and thank you all for attending today. And with that, we will conclude the ceremony.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lynn.